I will restore to you what the locusts have taken. It's a verse from Joel 2:25. And there's quite a few different versions, there's a verse there. There's quite a few different versions of this verse, and some of them say things like, I will restore to you what the locusts ate. I will restore to you the years the locusts have eaten. My favourite's the New King James Version, although I've said it's something else. Anyway, I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter. Gives you a bit of an image in your mind, doesn't it? This beautiful, lush green field, this swarm of locusts comes, descends, devours, and then leaves it utterly devastated. And God's promising to restore that. This is a verse, this is a promise that God gave me in 2012. And I want to share with you this morning, as part of the message, a little bit of my story, a little bit about what God has done in restoring me. It's an amazing story of restoration. It's a story of an incredibly faithful God who loves us unbelievably. And it's the reason that I can stand before you today and say, hi, my name's Karyn, and I've got extravagant faith. As you know, we've been doing our Extravagant Generosity series, and we've looked at things like God being an extravagant God. We've looked at extravagant contentment. Donna last week looked at how our giving can have an extravagant impact. And today, as part of telling you my story, I'm looking at extravagant faith. So, my story, here we go. I'm not going to cover all the years of my life. I mean, I'm only 28, but let's go with that. I was born into a loving Christian family. There was lots of love, but I wasn't born into money. I was born into love, there was lots of love, but there was never heaps of money. And I wanted to say that because I knew the value of money growing up. And in my 20s, I was really blessed by God. I had a good job, I was able to save, I was able to buy an investment property, did some overseas holidays. I'm not saying I was like flush with cash, but I was very comfortable, thank you very much. And I was looking forward to a really comfortable life. Awesome. And all through my 20s, some of my 20s I wasn't really that close to God, but by my late 20s, I was in a really good relationship with God. I felt that I was putting Him first, that I had a really close connection with God. So that brings me to the end of my 20s, which is impossible because I'm only 28 now. But anyway, in my early 30s, time machine, in my early 30s, I started dating a guy. I know. Right? Shocking. Woo! And I should tell you that this story does involve another person, obviously. I've just mentioned him. And I think right up front that I need to be really clear with you about why I'm sharing this. Because as I share this, it might be very easy to form some opinions on this person. It might be very easy to cast them in a bad light, but that is not my intention today. My intention is not for you to form a judgment on this person. My intention for you today is to know that we have a God who restores. We have a God who loves. We have a God that we can trust. I want you today not to be judging, but to thanking God for what He's done. So I need to put that up front because I am talking about my story, but it's also someone else's story. So I started dating this guy in my early 30s. And I'd met him at church when he was coming through the Salvation Army's Moonya recovery services. And he had a background where he had a problem with gambling. There was some alcohol and drug problems too, but the main problem was gambling. And I was very aware of this. I'd watched him come, try a program a few times and it hadn't really worked. But then one time something was different and we watched him just power through this. There was a new attitude. He was going to make it. And he did. He got through program, he got out, he was working. Things were just going so well for him. I thought he was a bit of a catch and we started dating. And if I'm going to be honest with you, it wasn't long before some dysfunctional behaviour started to appear. And really, probably in the first few weeks. But I thought, he's just adjusting to being in a relationship. This is tough. Let's cut him some slack. And then as the weeks continued and the dysfunctional behaviour continued and changed, and I kept thinking, no, it'll be okay. I'll just, it's difficult times. And as things progressed into the months and things got more weird, I guess, I just thought, no, it'll be okay. And if I'm going to be totally honest with you, which I think is probably a good idea, I had a bit of a strange attitude in hindsight. See, my attitude was, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to be a woman of faith, you watch. I'm going to show people what God can do. I am going to be like faithful woman. I bought all the books, The Power of a Praying Wife, all these different... That's a great book, by the way, but not saying it's not, it is, but that was going to be me. I was going to be that faithful wife. You watch me go. I was going to show people what God could do. Did I actually stop and ask God if that's what he wanted me to do? No. Why would I do that? I just decided that's what God wanted me to do. And so as things continued on, it wasn't long before the first financial little thing raised its head. It was an old debt from the past that needed to be taken care of. So of course I was going to help out with that. Unfortunately, my perhaps naive, perhaps silly attitude and my generosity ended up being taken advantage of by the addiction that he was still caught in. And over the next year or two, this dysfunctional behaviour turned into manipulation and turned into coercion, and a whole lot of other stuff, and a lot of money ended up being handed over. And this year or two, by this stage, we were married, and I probably wasn't emotionally very well. I hid it very well. People didn't really know what was going on, except those closest to me. But I was starting to go down a sinkhole. And then after about 2 years, that's when things got really bad. Unfortunately, he discovered poker. Now, that hadn't been his gambling thing before, but it became it. And within a month or two, he'd lost his job and he was gambling every day. Now, you see, we'd bought a block of land. Well, I'd bought a block of land, and we were going to build a house. It was going to be swish and everything. And so him losing his job put a bit of a dent in that, but I thought, it's okay. I've got my investment property. I can sell that. I'll make some cash. We'll still be able to do it. I'm going to do this. You watch me, woman of faith, powering on, blinkers on. And so I sold the investment property and I made good money. We're talking six-figure money I made on it. And the money came in, and there's no nice way to put this, the money went in one foul swoop. I can't tell you what that's like. It was a very blurry time. And things just went down from there. The next couple of years, and honestly I don't remember it all, which is probably a good thing, it was just this cycle of just hemorrhaging money and just yuck. Absolute yuck. And by the time I got to 2012, when God made me this promise, I've never actually worked out exactly how much I lost, because I don't think that would be good for my mental health, and I don't think it would be a helpful thing to do. But I've estimated about $250,000 to $300,000 down, plus I was about $100,000 in debt. Now, I tell you that not so for sympathy. I tell you that because you need to know what God's restored me from. There's a reason I'm telling you this. So there we are, 2012, and God says to me, I'm at a women's conference, and I like to think that I looked like a microwave. Might sound strange. But you know how if you put something in a microwave and you don't put the lid on right and it explodes everywhere? While the door of that microwave is shut, it looks like a microwave. It looks nice and clean and tidy. But when you open it up, there's a mess inside. But that was me. I was a microwave. Looked fine. I was talking to people. I was doing my thing. Inside, I was an exploded soup can in a microwave. But I was at this women's conference, and God said to me, someone was talking about this verse, and I felt God say to me, I'm going to restore what was taken from you. And look, I don't just go, oh, good, God told me that, sweet. Like, I prayed about it, I tested it, I got people to pray for me. I really wanted to make sure God was making me this promise, that it wasn't just something I'd made up. And I really felt that this was God telling me this. Now, I would like to tell you that 2 weeks after God made me that promise, I opened my net banking one morning and there was $1 million in my bank account. That is not what happened. It would have been a nice story. And I say to God sometimes, if you want to give me $1 million, I'll do good with it. God says no. See, God knew that wasn't the restoration that I needed. God knew it was about so much more than that. God knew that giving me $1 million might solve some immediate financial issues, but I wasn't going to do all the things that I needed him to do. The restoration that I needed was a restoration of me, a restoration of my heart, a restoration of my faith, a restoration of my trust in God. And that's what he's done. And I'll tell you, I'm not debt-free yet, but 4 months. In December, I am debt-free, baby. How good's that? And I've got a spreadsheet of everything I've paid since 2012, and it doesn't work. I don't know how it works. There is no way that I have done what I've done, that I've paid the bills that I've paid. But God said to me right at the beginning, if you put me first, if you honour me with your money, you'll be okay. You will always have what you need. And so I made a decision to tithe, which is, the amount that God and I have agreed every fortnight that I will give him. And I'm not perfect. I've missed one or two in the 6 years. I'll be honest. I think everyone misses one or two here and there, but I think I've caught most up. But, I made this commitment to tithe, and God has never let me down. We have this thing, God and I, where the day before payday, I've always got $20. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes I literally only have $20 the day before payday. But God has never let me down. And I don't live on the poverty line. I've got quite a comfortable life. I buy takeaway coffee most days, which is, some people think is frivolous, but it's my little thing for myself. I go out for dinner. I don't live a flash life. As you can tell, I'm extremely into fashion. So I don't spend a lot of money there. But I live a comfortable life, a contented life with God. And there's a couple of things he's done that they'll just blow your mind. First thing, so when all this happened in 2012, I was working for the state government. I'd been there about 6 years, and I was a temporary public servant. Because I was working on projects, they would just renew every year. And this just went on, and some people have been temporary for 20 years. And my boss had been trying to get me made permanent because I met some criteria. And one Friday she came to me and said, "It's done." She gave me the letter and she said, "You are now permanent." The next day, the Saturday, was a state election. And for those of you that remember the 2012 state election, Campbell Newman got in. One of the first things he did was to get rid of all temporary public servants. I was made permanent the day before the state election. Tell me that's not God. I mean, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. When you hear the next one. So in 2010, I'd had a car accident where I was a passenger, and I've got some ongoing neck problems from that. And I was encouraged to put in a third-party claim to cover all those costs. And the solicitor said, "Look, you should be right. You should be able to get, this amount of money." And I'm like, "Oh, that would be great because that would cover, this debt." So that much was what they said. I didn't get that much. I got that much. And with that, I did pay a little bit of debt, but God said, "That's actually not what I want you to do with all of that." And he enabled me to put a deposit on a little townhouse. Now, that might seem like a really silly thing to do when I've got this massive amount of debt. But you've got to remember, my restoration was not just about the money. My restoration was about, I'd lost my home. I'd lost my sense of me. And so in God allowing me to buy my little townhouse, he was restoring the home in me. I mean, my mum's home is always my home, but, my own little home. And I don't know how I got a mortgage. That's just insane. But tell me that's not God. And lastly, I'm studying. I'm at Bible college part-time, which I love. And, I've just, for the last couple of years, I've wanted to study full-time, which is just ridiculous. There's no way that can happen. Or is there? So there's more changes happening in the government, and there's some redundancy packages going around my work. And it's not 100% official, it's like 99% because it's not signed off yet, but June next year I'm going to be made redundant. Woo. If I'm careful, which God has taught me how to be over the last 6 years, I can live for the rest. I'm doing an extended master's and it will take me probably 18 months to finish. I can do that and have a bit of wriggle room to work out what I want to do, what God wants me to do with the rest of my life. How does that even happen? How does that even happen? Well, God, that's how it happens. So yeah, they are some of the things that God has done in my life, some of the ways he has restored me. Now you're thinking, well, that's great, but what's that got to do with extravagant generosity and the Corinthians passage from before? Well, I'd like to tell you. God has taught me a couple of things about my extravagant faith. In fact, he's taught me what it is and what it isn't. Because I had in my mind for a long time that extravagant faith was a particular thing, but it's not really what I thought it was at all. And these things each relate back to something to do with extravagant generosity, and I'd like to share them with you in the minutes I've got left. So what my extravagant faith isn't, and what it is. Firstly, it is not all about the money. It is about the whole person. As I said, God could have given me some random amount of money and paid all my debts off. But you know what? I wouldn't be where I am today. Now, I'm not saying it was great going through what I went through, but God has restored me as a person to so much more than I was. He has restored my trust in Him. I have a closer relationship with Him than I've ever had before. I have, it's like He's released gifts and abilities in me that I didn't have. He's just restored me as a person. And it was never about the money. And you know what? Our extravagant generosity isn't about the money either. This verse here, verse 11 says, "You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion." Sometimes when we talk about generosity, and the Bible promises us that if we put God first with our money, that He will bless us. And sometimes it's so easy to just expect financial blessings. Don't get me wrong, God definitely does financial blessings. But sometimes He knows even more what you need. Sometimes He knows you need even more than that. And God is a God who will bless you and enrich you in every way. It's about so much more than money. The other side of it too is that our extravagant generosity outward is about more than money. You know, there's the old little phrase about giving of your time, your talent, and your treasure. Sometimes spending time with somebody is an amazingly extravagant thing to do. When you've got busy things you're meant to be doing, but this person really needs some time, going and having a cup of coffee with someone can be an extravagant gift of generosity. It's about so much more than the money. It's about the whole person. Secondly, my extravagant faith is not all about me. It is all about God. See, I had this plan of what I was going to show everybody with what God had done. I was making it about me. And one of the things God has taught me in this period of restoration is it has nothing to do with me. My extravagant faith, can I have extravagant faith by myself? No. I can only have extravagant faith because of the one I have extravagant faith in. And, you know, there's a verse that helped me a lot during this time, and it's this one. Hebrews 11:11. "And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise." Now, this didn't just help me because I'm getting on in years and still hope that maybe one day I can have a baby. That's a nice verse for that. But this helped me because it makes it very clear who was responsible for the baby. It doesn't say Sarah was enabled to have a child because she had great faith. It says Sarah was enabled to have a child because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. It was nothing to do with Sarah and everything to do with the God that she had the faith in. And my story of restoration is exactly the same. I could not restore myself. Only God could do that. And it's the same with our generosity. There's a verse here from 2 Corinthians that talks about how all of God's promises are yes. All of God's promises are yes and amen. When God makes a promise to you, it will happen. And that's what I've experienced in my life. That's how I could claim that Hebrews 11 verse where it says, it's not about me, it's about the one that I have the faith in. So verse 10 of the Corinthians passage we looked at before says, "Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food." It's about God. It's not about us. And when we turn our attitude about giving to God and remembering that it's all about God and everything comes from God in the first place, it puts a whole new perspective on our giving, on our generosity. And you know, last week Donna spoke about extravagant impact. And the last bit of this verse says, remember it's about God. We've got our eyes fixed on God. And as we do that, yes, He will supply everything, but He will also enlarge the harvest of our righteousness. We can have an extravagant impact. And the more we focus on God with our generosity, the more impact we can have because it frees Him up to do what He needs to do with it. When we're worried about ourselves and we're thinking it's all about us, our generosity doesn't have as much impact. So that's the second thing I've learned. I hope that turns out to be a good photo, Brian. Thirdly, so my extravagant faith was never all about the money, and it was about the whole person. It wasn't about me, it was about God. Thirdly, it wasn't about an amount, it was about an attitude. Now, I very specifically told you roughly how much I lost. And now I'm saying it's not about an amount. But I need you to know how much I'd lost, because there is no way that that is something that I, as a human being, can come back from. That is something that, as I said before, it's not about me, it's about God. I can only come back from this with God. And if I focused on the amount, if I sat down and worked out the amount and worked out what I could have been doing today, and that wouldn't be extravagant faith. Extravagant faith for me was about having the attitude of trusting God and knowing that God could do this. If I focused on the amount, I never would have made it. But it was about my attitude of trusting God. One of the verses here says, each of you should give what you've decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. The amount that we give in our extravagant generosity, it's not about an amount, it's about an attitude. Now, let me just say, I'm not saying that we can all go, hey, it's not about an amount. Sweet, I'm going to tithe $1 a week, because that wouldn't be the right attitude, probably. But it's not about the amount, it's about the attitude that we have towards God. Okay, here we go. I've saved the best for last, the tricky for last. My extravagant faith is not about expectations, it's about trust. As I said, I had this kind of warped attitude of this is what God's going to do. And even when God told me he was going to restore me, I decided that for quite some time that he was just going to give me a chunk of money. But God knew what I needed. God knew that I needed so much more than that. And he didn't meet my expectations. In the end, he actually far outweighed them. He far outmet them. And you know, sometimes I hear people say that it's really hard to trust God. I hear people say it's hard to trust God, he let me down. I struggle with that because I want to say, really? Tell me how God's let you down. Because when we say God let me down, I think what we're really saying is God didn't meet the expectations that I have of him. God didn't do what I told him to do. God didn't do the things the way I told him to do them. And that's a hard reality to face. But God does not let us down. When God makes us a promise, God keeps that promise. Now, one thing we need to be careful with here is we need to know when God has promised us something and when it's just a want, an expectation. And the Bible is full of God's promises. It's great. You can go through and you can say, God's promised me that. But you also got to be sensible about it. So the verse about Sarah having a child in her own age, my mum's going to be unhappy. My mum's 82 this year. Hi, Mum. So imagine if Mum was reading the Bible and said, Sarah had a child in her old age, I'm going to have a child. She'd probably think that was the worst thing ever. Obviously, that's a ridiculous example, but, you know, to pick a verse out and go, well, God did that for that person, so God's going to do it for me. That's not the way it works. But God does give us promises, both corporately, you know, that he will bless us, that he will look after us when we put him first, and he also gives people individual promises. And I think it's really important that we remember that, because it's not about our expectations of him, it's about trusting that he knows what he's doing and that he will meet the promises. So, and God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Having all that you need. Say it with me. Need. One more time. Need. God knows I need coffee every day. Let's be honest. That's why I've, you know. So that's my story of restoration and the things that I've learnt. It was never about the money. It was about me as a whole person. It wasn't about me. It was about the one that I have the faith in. It wasn't about an amount. It was about an attitude. And it wasn't about my expectations of how God was going to do it. It was about me trusting God to know what he was doing. I have one final thought. The Joel 2:25 verse says, I will restore what the locust took. So I've told you what was taken, and I've told you how it was taken. But the one thing I haven't told you is what I define as the locusts. And it might be really easy to think, well, obviously she's talking about her ex-husband as the locust, but that is not the case. In this story, the locust is addiction. Because you know what? Not only is the addiction taken from me, it's taken from him too. Now, I'm not saying he's perfect. He could have done some things differently. But the root problem here was the addiction. And I think it's very important when we are in a situation where we have been hurt, where we are going through something, where we've been impacted by somebody else's actions or a situation, that we are able to drill down and identify exactly what the core is. No, it doesn't excuse some of his behaviour, but with me being able to identify that it's the addiction that's the locust, that means that I'm not spraying anger and hurt all over the place crazily. And, I'm very aware that we have people in our church who are on the recovery journey. And I'm aware that we have people who've been impacted by addiction from other people. And, maybe some of the people that are with us today from Moonya, maybe you're at the beginning of the journey where you're saying, God, I need you to start restoring me. And absolutely, that's my prayer for you. But I know that one of the later steps, step 8, is about making amends wherever possible. And this is the one I've actually spoken to my ex in the last few days quite a few times about this. And we're actually friends now, which we're God friends. It's a type of friendship that it's bizarre, but we're friends and I care about him as a person. And, we've talked about this in the last few days and he said that's the thing he struggles with the most because he can never give me back the money. But step 8 doesn't say give Karyn back the money. Step 8 says make amends wherever possible. And I say to him, wherever possible means that you have apologised and that you're trying to make the best of the rest of your life. You're trying to get better. Giving me back all that money, that's not possible. But you know what? What is impossible with man is possible with God. And so my word of encouragement to anyone, and I'm not just talking about addiction, to anyone that has been hurt by somebody or anyone that has lost, anyone that has been impacted negatively by something that someone has done, or anyone that has actually felt that their behaviour has impacted somebody. I think it's absolutely biblical to make amends wherever possible. But when it goes beyond what's possible for you, it's possible for God, and I am living proof of that. And I think someone needs to hear that today, that you can hand someone to God and say, it's impossible with me, God, but it's possible with you. And so we're going to have an opportunity to respond to, the smorgasbord of things I've talked about this morning. And I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. I'm actually going to ask some of the prayer team to come too, because I think it's always, if I want to go for prayer, it's always easier if there's a person to go to rather than just, the great unknown space. And, I don't know where you're at. Maybe you have had a promise from God and you want to see that promise fulfilled and you're like, come on, God, is it going to happen? Maybe you just need to come today and say, you know what, God, I'm still trusting in you for that promise. Maybe you need restoration. Maybe you want to come before God this morning and say, God, I need that restoration in my life, because God is a God of restoration. Even though that promise was specific to me, the promise of restoration is for everybody. Maybe you've been impacted by someone and you need to be restored from that. Maybe you feel you have impacted someone and you want to hand that person to God and say, God, restore that person. Maybe you have a friend or a family member or someone you want to come and stand in the gap for this morning, someone that you feel helpless. Louise shared last night that she just didn't know what to do this whole time. That's my sister. Maybe you have a family member or a friend that you want to put forward and say, God, restore this person. So as the band sings and the prayer team waits, I invite you to come and pray.